maybe more than I need. Let's.
So it's good to have more than too little.
Yeah, that's good. And otherwise, they could be distributed afterwards. I used the Food Waste Free United as the background, and resourceful with food as the start of the lecture. It starts with of course data. So what are we talking about? I had the privilege to coordinate 2 pan-European programs on food waste topic. One was Fusions, running 2012-2015, getting the basis right, and then already got engaged with over 200 startups. Mostly, I would say, social innovators that were trying to tackle some of these issues and try to find solutions. But what I think was also elementary is getting the data right for the first time based on a harmonized framework, so that we compare apples with pears and getting an insights on how much resources in Europe are not utilized in the best way. And that's about 88 million tons of food being wasted every year. And you can see the distribution across the supply chain, not telling where to blame, but telling where most of the loss and the waste occurs. And depending on definition, most of it happens to be with us consumers at home. But also linking it to what I think are more crucial issues like climate change mitigation, other bioavailability preservation, resource use, etc. Let's go to the ecosystem. What I've tried to do is, since I work a long time on this area, is like, how do we systematically make progress? And when we started to work in the Netherlands, I talk mostly about the Netherlands as an ecosystem here, is in 2015, there was the target being set in 2009 for the Dutch government to reduce food waste with 20%. Based on all the evidence we had in 2009, this would like, okay, we're going to do this, it's an easy job. But we were not successful at all. We saw hundreds of initiatives, startups, big companies, governments imposing actions, and these individual actions in many cases were successful, but didn't improve the situation. So we didn't see the food waste level bottom line going down. So that was the starting point of saying, okay, we need better alignment, we need a better plan, we need better type of collaboration to get things going. That was the starting point of the Refresh program, European program in 2015, with the basis hypothesis is, what if we build negotiated agreements from companies with government, with NGOs, with knowledge institutions to set a target, measure food waste and work on solutions in different stages of development. That was also the starting point of developing the national negotiated agreement and platform in the Netherlands with a clear target, Sustainable Development Goal 12.3. So being one of the first countries in the world that would halve food waste in 2030. That would mean that in the Netherlands, we have to find about 1 million tons of food waste that's currently going to waste to keep it in the food supply chain. 1 million tons. Also showing the impact that we are looking for to be successful. Building it on, I would say, not a well agreed approach is prevention is always better than having it as a side stream, making and trying to get the food to people. Then as a last resort, getting it in animal feed, and you see a small area of biomaterials and chemicals, high value, and everything below is something that you should try to reduce as much as possible in the recycling and the waste area. So for us, anaerobic digestion, for example, is not a part of the solution. It is part of waste management that's maybe not 100% avoidable, but it's not something that will be part of how we can meet our targets. In a systemic approach, it means like working on different areas in parallel, but also trying to get things together in the different areas where we need to make the progress. So one is about monitoring and the progress and the impact. So it's about companies being transparent on how well they utilize their resources and how they make progress and what's the impact of that. The second, as you would understand, because that's where most of the activities is on innovation. Startups developing new solutions, but also big companies using their skill to implement those solutions to have the impact. And in this area, it's much about supply chain collaboration. The third, as saw in the figures a large amount of food waste happens to happen with consumers at home. So we had to target that also. And the fourth one that was addressed also in the discussion before is like, how can we change the rules of the game? There could be barriers in legislation, or there could be opportunities where legislation could adopt, but it's also the way that companies do business together. Is it only focused on the economics, the financial benefits, or is it also relevant to see how we can change the drivers for business also in the societal areas of making ecologic and social impact? So working on those four together was for us like the pillars for a systemic approach. At the moment, we only exist 1.5 years. Officially, we have 80 businesses connected to our platform, and maybe you recognize some of the logos. It is a good balance between startups, SMEs, and the big corporates. 80% of our stakeholders is business, 20% could be government organizations, knowledge institutions, or NGOs. But it's really led by business. What you can also see, if you know a little bit about the Netherlands, that we have 80% of all the Dutch retailers connected to our platform. That means that 80% of the retailers report to us on their food waste figures, and that's, I would say, quite unique, and that also is an important driver for the change across the ecosystem. To get this 1 million tons, this is a little bit detailed, is we have split it up in 6 different segments that would, at the end, in 2030, all add up to 1 million tons. So it's on consumer level, increased donation and redistribution. That doesn't have a lot of additional impact in the Netherlands, looking at the total volumes, out of home channel, retail channel, utilization and conversion of surplus from the supply chain, and probably the most challenging one, but the most impactful, one of the most impactful ones, if we produce what is needed and not overproduce like what we're doing now. And that is probably the main reason why many of the activities on prevention and reducing food waste was not successful. Bottom line is that if you don't, with the same amount of market and consumers, put in less food in the system, it's going to waste or be lost somewhere in the supply chain. So in a systemic approach, you also need to address the production side of things. I already explained a little bit about the retailers supplying data. So in the beginning of this year, I asked to them, like, okay, we have 80% of market. Why aren't you going to publish those data and have a public benchmark on the amount of food that's being wasted by the Dutch retail? And they happily agreed to that. So now we can tell that the benchmark for big retail in the Netherlands is 1.7%. Having that, including where the food waste occurs, is now a very important, let's say, leverage point for them to act on, because every retailer is now working on to beat not only their own data and their own level of food waste, but also beating the collective benchmark. That leads to new commitments, that leads a lot to scaling up. So we see, and we hear that back from many of the solution providers, including startups in our ecosystem, is that retail in the Netherlands is now one of the best piloting grounds to test out new innovations, because they want to beat not only their own targets, but also beat the national benchmark. So this is giving an additional extra pressure for them, but another pull from innovations all over the world to see the Netherlands as one of the piloting grounds to test out new approaches and solutions. So we also see more and more startups from all over the world coming to the Netherlands to see if they can help out some of these actors there. So what we see on activities, this is a kind of overview. Many are data related, some are more supply chain related. And what I think is important, it fits to the strategy and the structure of the different and the positioning of the different retailers. For example, Albert Heijn, the largest one, they focus more on the data solutions, intelligent solutions like dynamic pricing with Wasteless. They started up that program, as probably some of you know. Lidl, more the discount, has focused on how do we sell the product just before the end of sales date, and working with Too Good To Go to sell the products to consumers. And Too Good To Go, I think, in this area in the Netherlands and probably across Europe, is the most successful startup or scale up that we can see in action, because it is, for those retailers, it is definitely a quick win solution. You start a contract with them, and tomorrow you're already contributing to meeting your targets. So we see a distribution of different activities. Some examples to mention, and that also has to do with innovation. It's not only about the technology, but it is also about let's say the leadership and the willingness of companies to change. The right one is a recent innovation that started with one of the Jumbo retail stores with the franchises. Is on average, if you look at the data again, we see that 7.7% of bread in the Netherlands is wasted in the supermarket as return bread. This has been there for decades. And there are good solutions for that, but it was like in the supply chain, it's like, okay, this is the way we do it. And we accept that we have a certain level of return, 7 to 7.7%. This retailer now says, okay, I'm talking about it for 10 years. Why don't you make a specific category of fresh frozen bread, that you always have fresh bread in your store, and you can allow yourself to order less bread to the breaker. This retailer has done it, and as a consequence now has 60% less returns, and always fresh frozen bread in this supermarket. This model is positive for profit, for climate, and for other indicators. So this probably now, since it has been proven to be successful, will be rolled out in the future. That also shows that leadership is important, but also having living laboratories like this for us is a living laboratory. We can all do all type of testing in practice in that retail is so important, is to be transformative and to see how we can make change in that specific supply chain, also in this case supermarket. And the left side is another example we saw also in Fusion's time. There's hundreds of startups, social innovators that try to make new products out of food waste. It's very difficult to be successful with just that. So the food waste factory was one of the first that created scale, that's created sufficient economy of scale to be successful in making about 10,000, 20,000 liters of soup per day. That can be at the moment be sold in 50 different markets. So it's not only about a good idea, but it's also how do you create market and how do you create scale to become successful. I know many of you are working on packaging. That's one of the areas where we see a lot of new activities and innovation starting up, but that has to do with companies are in dilemma. It's either wrap or waste. It's like many businesses have committed to plastic packs in the Netherlands or Europe, reducing the amount of plastics they use, but plastics has an important function in the protection of the product. So we're looking for the solutions where innovations will contribute to both means, both targets. So reducing food waste, but also reducing material use and reducing the amount of plastics, especially being littered. But this is a problem with a lot of dilemmas. And this is a problem with a lot of perceptions also by consumers. So getting the data right, getting the figures right is a very important one. But if you look at the environmental impact, for example, it is so important that you don't increase whatever solution we have the amount of food waste, because then you're probably worse off. The impact of the packaging compared to the product is typically 5 to 95%. So the impact of the product, if you lose it in the environmental impact, is so much bigger than just the packaging. So it's a trade-off in sales performance, what's of course very important for the retailer. Protect product and shelf life, minimize material use, global warming potential reduction, recyclability, circularity, and minimizing littering. So it's a lot of dilemmas and trade-offs that people have to meet. What we do, we support businesses with insights, with the different aspects to see if we can help them to make better solutions on what packaging product combination to choose. But this is a quite interesting area, because this is where there's a lot of societal pressure on. It's like consumers don't want plastics. Yeah, at the moment they do more because of the hygienic effect, but that hopefully will change quickly. So it's like, how can we reduce the use of plastics, increase circularity, introduce new ways of having circularity by design included in the packaging design, including the protection. Other areas on innovation, I'm quite sure that many of you are working on, for example, smart sensors. The issue there is what many innovators forget to look at is the legislative impact. For example, this is on the left, you see an innovation by a company called Keep It in Norway. There they're using already 4 years an analog sensor to tell the best before or the use by date of a specific product. It's used in Norway, but that doesn't mean it can easily be used all across Europe, because in every country there's a difference in legislative aspects, interpretations, that you would definitely have to look at to make things possible. So for example, we are already working for 2 years with Keep It to get things and in our legislation adopted that it's even possible to try and test out in practice in our living labs or in our supply chains, how consumers will see the added value of using a sensor that tells the real shelf life of any product. Well, we know that there's already been 10 years being worked on the next generation, but you have to make sure that also in the legislative aspect and also in the interpretation by the different country levels, that there is an acceptance of using this type of innovation. So that's what we also are working on. To add with a positive thing is based on the new way of collaboration, based on also setting up a different type of campaigning, consumer campaigning, much more focused on the positive norm and not so much on the negative aspects of food waste. We finally see the levels of food waste in the Netherlands going down at consumption level with 29% in the last 6 years. And the next step, of course, is how to make sure that in this systemic way, using the ecosystem approach, where startups become scale-ups, where the big companies will scale up also solutions, and at the end will lead to that we in a systemic model in a sustainable food system halve food waste within 9 years and 3 months from now. Thanks for your attention and happy to answer any of your questions.
For that point, that's really, really interesting. There's so much information in that, but I learned a lot. I thought it was love to learn more. Unfortunately, we're going to go for a break now because we're a bit over schedule. If anyone has any quick questions, we can maybe fit them in. Otherwise, we can chat at the break in the room if needed. And also later we have the networking session if you're able to hang around. That's
okay.
Yeah. Okay, because I'll have loads of questions probably actually for you. But unfortunately we have to kind of keep to the schedule. So we're going to take a break now for about 10 minutes. So we'll be back at 20 to 5, so 4:40. So the startups that just arrived, apologies, we have about 10 minutes delayed. So we're going to 10 minutes delay your talks as well. We'll be having 3 startups talking about upcycling solutions. And I'm sure they're very interesting ones as well. So thanks for everyone. Thanks a lot, Toine. It was really interesting again. And we'll see you back in about 9 minutes, 8 minutes now, actually.